David, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Pete.
Got you on a big day, man.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. You guys snuck me in.
It's a big day, though.
Yeah, why is that?
Come on, what, you've not been on Twitter today?
I've been preparing for this interview.
So you've not been on Twitter today?
I know, it's rare. Maybe a little bit, but
so
no.
You haven't seen the big news today?
No, I haven't.
Honestly?
I think when we say the news, you'll have seen it.
You've not seen the Craig Wright judgment?
Oh, yes.
I mean, come on.
I was going to congratulate you on that, actually.
I've been in a 5-year lawsuit with that motherfucker.
Yeah. I actually saw you troll Elon, and you said, somebody's, he's lying about his identity.
I've not been on Twitter today.
Yeah.
Well, my normal is like, Twitter from, dawn till dusk. And now I'm like, well, I only checked it, 10 times today as opposed to.
I'm not trolling Elon. He's breaking the terms of service with Twitter. Twitter's terms of service say you cannot imitate a real person. You have to put parody. And so Craig Wright's account says that he's the inventor of Bitcoin.
So he's going to have to put parody with a little clown emoji on there now.
Yeah, or he has to take that. He has to take that off. If not, I might sue that fucker. No, it's a momentous day.
Yeah, well, congratulations. It's amazing kind of what you've been through, and I'm sure a lot that we didn't see behind the scenes.
Yeah, man, there's a lot. But no, and also our brother Hodler, all the devs he went after. Fuck that guy. Fuck Calvin and fuck off. But yes, so it's cool that you get to be the person I get to share this with.
I love it. Happy to be here.
How you doing, man? You good?
I'm good.
David, right, we're gonna have to get into some technical shit with you today. And I'm gonna make you explain it in a way that I will understand.
Okay.
Which is important. But can we have your Bitcoin story?
Sure. So I'm no one really all that special. I used to own a small private money fund, and I sold that a couple of years ago. And now I spend most of my days just kind of like doom scrolling Bitcoin Twitter and getting lost in some of the more esoteric topics of Bitcoin. I think I probably got a little bit more attention recently because of some videos I've made describing these things like ZK rollups and how they could potentially scale Bitcoin. My Bitcoin origin story, I always joke that when people post on Twitter and they say, tag the person who got you into Bitcoin, I tag Peter Schiff because, I was this kind of armchair libertarian reading, Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged and those books, well over a decade ago. And I used to see this guy, Peter Schiff, and he'd go out to Wall Street and kind of grill people on, capitalism and kind of, troll before that was even a thing. And it was many years later when I saw Peter actually on a Pomp podcast, and I was like, oh, I wonder what my buddy Peter Schiff is doing. And he was talking obviously about gold versus Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, like a lot of the stuff he's saying, like I think Bitcoin's actually just a better fit for it. And so to this day, I still very much thank, Peter for kind of, orange pilling me before it was the orange pill and then kind of leading me to Bitcoin.
Well, he's a Bitcoiner. He won't admit it, but he's fundamentally, his ideas are Bitcoin.
100%. Yeah. I think he just has to, he's just committed so hard to the brand that he just has to, die on the sword, so to speak.
Yeah, sad, really. I was on Pomp's show with him once. I was in Miami. Pomp texted me. It's like, I've got Peter Schiff coming. Do you want to come in and abuse him with me? I was like, fuck yeah. He's
just one of those guys that even though he's like not publicly a hardcore Bitcoiner, he really is kind of lovable, and I like him. I'm very thankful for having Peter Schiff and him kind of being part of the Bitcoin story.
My problem with Peter Schiff is he will have. All right, we all should take ownership of our decisions, but he's directed people away from Bitcoin,
right?
By misleading them, maybe lying, refusing to do the work. A lot of the things he says are just fundamentally untrue. He said Bitcoin's only for speculation, which is completely and utterly untrue. Only a small amount of research will show you that it's not only for speculation. But it's okay to speculate.
Right.
But that's the only thing that disappoints me about him. I wish he would see the light.
I think he actually is indirectly leading people to Bitcoin, like you said, with his ideas and kind of his underlying philosophy. And as Bitcoin begins to demonetize gold, people will kind of be on a much easier and smoother path to realize that.
But so while you were doing that, you were kind of going down your libertarian thing. You were feeding the beast over the private money fund.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually released another video called Confessions of a Private Money Lender, where I was kind of like, I was just, a normal guy, creating a business that I thought was like, a valid, legitimate business, and following my own incentives. And when I started learning about, kind of these like evils of bankers and, rehypothecation and, the credit and markets and like all these kind of more sinister things that people like Jeff Snyder and Caitlin Long talk about, there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, I was like, am I that guy? And like in some ways I kind of was, feeding some of this fiat debt monster and some of these kind of, financial games that a lot of Austrian economists, really kind of rail against. And so, I found the light and now trying to reverse course.
Did it click for you straight away with Bitcoin?
It was much easier because, again, I had mentioned that I came from that very philosophical background. Like someone like Ayn Rand, this author, writes very much about the kind of like the morality and the virtue of self-interest in capitalism and how money is not this kind of root of all evil, but it's actually this kind of like benevolent, beautiful good. And so when I read books like Saifedean and the Bitcoin Standard, like I was predisposed to those Austrian ideas. So once I made that connection of that Bitcoin is the instantiation of these like underlying philosophical principles, I was just like, I was very hard and very fast into finding it.
Right. Okay. And did you manage, therefore, to completely avoid the shitcoin phase?
Yes.
Because not many people do.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I think what we'll talk about in this interview is like I come at Bitcoin very much from like a hardcore monetary maximalism. Like when people say, fix the money, fix the world, like that is a revolution that I most closely align with. And I think that Bitcoin, even in its current condition, and doesn't have any of the other shitcoiny type features, like it is probably like the single most important innovation of our times. And even if nothing else changes with Bitcoin, like it'll probably do more for, kind of pulling back the veil of government tyranny and kind of providing a life raft for people under monetary oppression than any other thing, in our lifetimes. But admittedly, I didn't go down the shitcoin phase, but there are things where I looked at and I said, wow, like some of that stuff in some of these other ecosystems, like is potentially valuable. Like some of those applications that we rail on and say are total scams, like are actually things that I would like to see on Bitcoin. And some of that technology actually is potentially real. And I think for several years now in the Bitcoin community, it's almost been like, sacrilegious or almost heresy to like speak of some of these ideas. But I'm happy to see some of that Overton window is shifting. And I think, people railed against some of these ideas of shitcoins and those projects, understandably so, because implicit in you kind of saying like, hey, I think this application is cool, or, I think this technology is cool, you were either supporting some sort of shitcoin and some sort of scam, or you were advocating for some sort of like fork to Bitcoin, which would undermine, the decentralization and the monetary revolution. But now I think people are kind of like waking up to some of these ideas and saying like, okay, maybe some of these technologies and these other projects, like maybe some of them are legitimate. Maybe some of these applications are very useful for the monetary revolution. And maybe we can start looking at these things without doing any sort of soft forks. And that's, I think, the new revolution, the new kind of party that's forming in Bitcoin.
But not everyone.
Sure, not everyone, of course.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
And it's a potential division that's happening.
Right. And so what do you mean by that?
Well, so I think there are Bitcoin monetary maximalists who believe all we need is Bitcoin. All we should focus on is Bitcoin. All we should care about is Bitcoin. Yeah. You even have some who don't care about Tether. They think the dollar's a shitcoin. And, I've had people react to me going to countries where people are using Tether because they want the stability of the dollar. Bitcoin's too volatile. And they're like, no, we should only be promoting Bitcoin. Bitcoin's all that matters. And there's technologies coming to Bitcoin where people are saying you just bring in shitcoins to Bitcoin. So it's not universal that people want tokens on Bitcoin. It's like not a universal want.
Right. No, totally. I think that's valid. But I mean, there's a couple things like
I'm indifferent, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, even if we wanted to be on this like hyper Bitcoinized world, like don't change anything, Bitcoin's as good as is. It's like there are literal limitations. Like, do we want to get to this world where 90%, 99%, maybe even more, 99.9% of the people in the world are literally priced out of being able to hold like a layer one UTXO? Like, is that, Bitcoin succeeding? Yes. But is it really kind of this full monetary revolution that we actually want? And, like maybe people don't want stablecoins. I don't actually think that Bitcoin-backed stablecoins are like shitcoins whatsoever.
I don't.
And I think arguably something like Tether is, because every single dollar that goes into Tether, like we shouldn't get it twisted. Like that is going to support the fiat debt monster. Like they are going out and buying treasuries.
Yep.
They are keeping the interest rates essentially lower. They are allowing this fiat game to perpetuate. But if you had something like Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, you could go to people in all these countries that you go out and you travel to, and you could say, hey, like, I know that you're not yet ready for Bitcoin. I know that you're living off $5 a day and you can't handle like a 50% volatility spike. But why would you use this thing like Tether that could be censored and that's backed by fiat? Like, why would you not use something that is 100% backed by Bitcoin, if not more than 100% backed by Bitcoin? That's censorship resistant and that doesn't kind of perpetuate these evils, and that you could send maybe fully encrypted end to end, privately. Like that is such an admirable goal for Bitcoin to pursue as like a bridge to hyper Bitcoinization.
Yeah, I don't think the sales technique needs to be don't perpetuate the system. The people in these regions, they just need the money. They
totally.
just need the stable. But I think it's a better pitch to Bitcoiners is to inspire them to build solutions. And if it's a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, it's still a dollar-pegged stablecoin, right?
Well, it's dollar pegged, but yeah, it's fully backed by Bitcoin. Like the way I almost think about it is like, Tether and a Bitcoin-backed stable, they're almost shaped like they're the same form. Like they take the form of a dollar, but the material backing them is fundamentally different. The Tether stablecoin is backed by U.S. Treasuries on the back end, which support the fiat system. The Bitcoin-backed stablecoins are backed by Bitcoin, which support Bitcoin number go up and kind of inherit more of those censorship-resistant properties of Bitcoin.
How does it actually work? What are the mechanics of that to ensure there is enough Bitcoin to support these backed stablecoins? Because I know, for example, if you want to take a loan out with someone like Ledger and you have to over collateralize in case the price drops, and you can hit a margin call where you have to send more collateral to them. How does it work in a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin world? Is it a similar mechanic?
Well, there's a couple different ways that you could build Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, and one of them is the way that you mentioned, that kind of like collateralized debt position. I think the OG one is that like DAI or Maker on Ethereum. There's also ways to create a synthetic dollar position using something like perpetual swaps, and this is things that what StableSats is doing, or Galoy, 1010 all of those companies. So in that one, say you have Bitcoin, you're also opening up a short position. And so if the price of Bitcoin in US dollar terms goes up because you have a short, you're actually losing money.
Right, okay.
But it's staying stable. And if it goes down, you're making money. So that's one way to create.
People, I remember back in like the 2017 days, people used to do that on BitMEX. Like rather than sell a position, you just go short.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know if it was pioneered by Arthur Hayes, but because he was running BitMEX, he kind of saw these kind of like, why are people doing this? Like he was looking at all the kind of flows and he understood that they were making this neutral position. So that's one way that you can create a stablecoin position, but there's numerous issues with the teams, in my opinion, that are trying to build that on Bitcoin. For one thing, they're using a centralized exchange on the back end. They're taking your Bitcoin and they're throwing it on, OKX or Coinbase or something. And so it's like, yeah, you have this stablecoin position, but you're giving up your funds to, a centralized trading venue.
And if you get rugged, then
tough shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative?
Well, you could rebuild these financial applications on, decentralized rails. And this is where things like layer 2 scaling solutions come in. And I think that, in my opinion, what's appearing to be the best scaling solution is going to be ZK rollups. And it's like very emergent and it's very new and it's very bleeding edge. But net of all the trade-offs, and there are definitely trade-offs, I think it's far superior than anything that we're seeing on Bitcoin, including, side chains or Lightning or RGB or ARC or Fedi mints, etc.
Right. Okay. Explain ZK rollups
Sure.
to me like I'm 5, because we've covered it previously. I didn't fully get it.
So a ZK rollup is an alternative layer 2 scaling solution. And it's probably most closely similar to a sidechain. But it has the ability to kind of be everything that I think a sidechain dreamed of being, but was never able to achieve. So with the ZK rollup, you could potentially have a trustless or trust minimized two-way peg. A sidechain has a federation, right? You could also, a ZK rollup.
So let's explain what that is. We'll have people who just don't understand what you mean by that.
Sure.
How do you achieve a trustless two-way peg? And you should probably explain what a federation is. And like Liquid would be a great example.
Okay. So a sidechain is a separate independent blockchain
Yep.
from Bitcoin. And it uses Bitcoin as kind of its native currency where, if you do a transaction, you're paying transaction fees, you're paying it in Bitcoin. In Blockstream, which is Blockstream, which wrote a white paper called Sidechains back in 2014. And they said, this is how we're going to scale Bitcoin. We're going to have the Bitcoin main chain. We're not going to change it because we don't want to do any of that. But we're going to have all of these separate independent side chains. And maybe some of them have bigger blocks. Maybe some of them are focused on privacy. They all have their different sort of specialties. And what you could do is you could take your Bitcoin from the layer 1 and you lock it into some sort of multi-sig on the layer 1. And then you get a wrapped or a derivative version of that on the side chain. So in Liquid, you're locking your Bitcoin on the layer 1 Bitcoin, and then Liquid is giving you LBTC on the side chain.
Which is a one-to-one peg.
In theory, yes. But the issue is that you're essentially trusting some sort of party to be able to honor your peg back into Bitcoin. So maybe if I describe the fundamental issue with all layer 2s, then we can get into how ZK rollups solve these. So as I mentioned, anytime you want to create an L2, functionally, essentially what's happening is people are sending their Bitcoin into an address on the layer 1, usually controlled by some sort of multi-sig. So assume me, you, and Danny each put 5 Bitcoin into a multi-sig. And that multi-sig is controlled by some party. It doesn't matter if it's wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, that's controlled by BitCo, a single centralized party. It doesn't matter if it's LBTC on Liquid, that's controlled by Adam Back and all of his people in the Federation. It doesn't matter if it's on some sort of drive chain where the multi-sig is controlled by the miners. Functionally, the reason you have to do this is because anytime you try to represent something outside of Bitcoin, it's an Oracle problem. Bitcoin cannot understand or see anything that happens outside of itself. And the only way that we could allow Bitcoin to see what's happening on some sort of layer 2 is if our nodes were also validating all of those transactions on that separate chain. But obviously, we don't want to do that because if we increase the requirements of the node or increase the functionality of Bitcoin, it decreases the decentralization. And so because of this Oracle problem, this limitation that Bitcoin can't see the world outside of itself, you're relying on some sort of centralized party to essentially relay that information back to the Bitcoin chain. So if all 3 of us are operating on this side chain or this separate layer 2, and we do a bunch of transactions, maybe you do some DeFi, you do some business transactions, and now Danny essentially has 2 Bitcoin, and he says, I want to bridge that back. You're relying on that permission party, again, whether it's BitGo or whether it's, the miners with drive chains or Adam Back or whatever, you're relying on them to observe what's happening in this L2 environment and then relay that, okay, Danny did all of these transactions. He now owns 2 Bitcoin, so we'll allow him to peg out of the multi-sig. What a ZK rollup is functionally doing, it's saying instead of there being some sort of permission party that facilitates this, what if we allow anyone to withdraw funds from that multi-sig? We put in our 5 Bitcoin each, but you allow anyone to withdraw funds. But the caveat is they have to provide something called validity or a zero knowledge proof, where they have to provide back to Bitcoin an unforgeable digital receipt that says, yes, I am trying to withdraw 2 Bitcoin, but all of the actions that I took to achieve that Bitcoin on this layer 2, all of them followed Bitcoin's rules of consensus, meaning all the transactions that Danny did, at no point in time were more than 21 million Bitcoins created. At no point in time did somebody receive funds without a valid cryptographic signature. At no point in time were any transactions processed out of order. And so what is happening on Bitcoin's side, it's essentially saying, okay, I wasn't able to see all of these transactions that David and Danny and Peter were doing on this L2, but honestly, I don't give a shit. Just prove to me that you followed my rules. And that's where this idea of a zero knowledge proof comes into play, which is kind of this magical form of cryptography. Traditionally, people know a zero knowledge proof as a privacy tool, where you can essentially prove that a statement is true without revealing the underlying contents. So if Danny pays you some Bitcoin, you can prove that payment was valid. That again, no more than 21 Bitcoin were created, that Danny did in fact have the money and that you did in fact receive it, but you're not revealing the kind of the data, like each of your names or the amounts. So it's private. And you can get mathematical proof of that actually happening. The way we're using zero knowledge proofs now is not necessarily just as a privacy tool, but more as a scalability tool. And so you can take that same concept where you can say, I'm going to prove to you that a statement is true under these constraints. I'm going to prove to you that anything that happened on this layer 2 is essentially valid according to the Bitcoin's consensus rules without Bitcoin needing to be aware of it, without Bitcoin needing to run a node. So that's like a very kind of profound breakthrough that you can prove the validity of something without somebody actually needing to go through and replicate that work.
Okay, so I want to walk through this as me as a user.
Yeah.
Right. So this layer 2 that uses zk rollups.
Yeah.
Where does it exist? Like, I understand Liquid is its own.
Yep.
Protocol. Is this just a separate protocol?
Yes.
Where does it exist? Like, how do we ensure it's decentralized?
Yeah. So it is essentially a separate layer 2. And the way that a rollup works is, again, if you think about this separate sidechain, the sidechain processes transactions, and there's transaction data that comes out of that. All of that data is posted into the Bitcoin layer 1. So it lives within the Bitcoin layer 1 blocks. And so by posting the transaction data from the sidechain into the Bitcoin layer 1, it inherits the Bitcoin security. So it's like a sidechain, but it can't fork independently. It essentially is bound by the confines of Bitcoin. So that's how it inherits the security. When you're also posting the zero knowledge proof into the Bitcoin, that's how you get this trustless two-way peg. The limitation that we're kind of getting at, and so to answer your question, it lives essentially on Bitcoin. However, because Bitcoin has limited block size, that ultimately becomes the kind of restraint on some of these ZK rollups, where as you start to post more and more data on the Bitcoin L1, eventually fees go up, and so they would also go up on the rollup. There are solutions to that, but that's the answer to your question of like, where does it live? And then how long can we essentially do that for?
Right. Okay. So itself has its own scaling issue.
Potentially. So it's almost like there's this umbrella term of like a rollup. And then if you want the absolute most pristine security assumptions, you always want to make sure that you can always trustlessly peg out your Bitcoin using a zero knowledge proof, then you need to post data onto the Bitcoin L1. And there is a compression effect that happens when you post data from this rollup or from this sidechain into the L1. So it does give you scalability benefits of probably like 20 to 40 times. But yes, you're exactly right. Eventually, you reach that scalability limitation. And this is what people call the data availability problem. That if you want to be able to peg out from the rollup, you need to be able to create a zero knowledge proof. And if you want to be able to create a zero knowledge proof, you have to have access to the data. And that's why we post it on the Bitcoin L1. If somebody says, hey, I really like this idea of a rollup, I like all this added functionality that we could possibly get, but I don't want to pay these fees to post it to the layer 1. They could post their data to Ethereum. They could post their data to Solana. They could post their data client side where they just hold it on their own computer. And all of us, if we're all using different data solutions, Pete, you're posting your data on the Bitcoin L1. I'm posting it on Ethereum. Danny's holding it on his own computer. All of us can still trustlessly interact and compose with each other. And so we can each choose our own level of security, our own like how assured we want to be that we can definitively trustlessly peg out. We can all pay for whatever level of security we want, but we can all interact with each other.
But what is the UX for that? Like, what is the UX for me making those decisions?
It can be flawless. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Which is built into wallets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so UX, I think this is one of the things that I'm like most excited about is in typical like Bitcoin world or Lightning, anytime you want to transact funds, your private key essentially has to sign off on that, which is what we want. We want security. But what if you could instead have a smart contract that can transact funds on your behalf? You can program that smart contract to say, hey, I only want you to be able to transact funds from this wallet if I have a signature from my private key. Or you could say, hey, I want any transaction over $10,000. I actually want it to be a 2 of 3 multisig. any transaction to these, 20 companies that are what Bitcoin did, partners, you're free to send those without any sort of signatures. If you want like something where you can get your dad on a wallet and it's like, he's not going to know what a seed phrase is. And, you want him to be able to press, I forgot my password and recover his thing. So where I'm going with this is you kind of mentioned this, like this UX, like how can this be clean? And it's like, you can program any of that into a ZK rollup. Like you have the full level of expressivity at your disposal. There's none of these kind of limitations that things like Lightning Network has, where it's like, we can kind of do this, but not really. We have to hack it in. Like anything you can logically think of in a ZK rollup world, you can build, including like the most hyper ideal, like best UX that you can possibly imagine.
So some of that functionality sounds like what Rob Hamilton's trying to build with Miniscript. But does this allow more expressivity?
Yeah, in my opinion, it definitively allows more expressivity. Like you're still kind of bound by the constraints of like, you have, keys and you have multi-sigs and like, Rob's great and like AnchorWatch is amazing, but like, I don't think that you could do things trustlessly where you could put, like almost like transaction limits or have these like these varying types of security setups. Or like another thing that you could potentially do is like, a lot of our phones have this thing called like a secure enclave in there where you can put, encrypted, private and store data securely without knowing that like Apple or Microsoft or somebody is like looking at that. With something like this wallet type setup, there's account abstraction that you can build in a ZK rollup. You can turn any of your phones into essentially a hardware wallet. So instead of having, something like a ledger, you can feel assured that you have, gold standard level security from your mobile phone. Like that's just an amazing way to scale user adoption without people being like, write down your seed phrases and go out and buy a ledger, like you have built into these devices. And I just don't think that you can do that with some of these other setups.
Okay, I still don't fully understand what's happening as a user. So what kind of thing am I trying to do with my Bitcoin, which would require me to use a ZK rollup? I know, for example, if I want to use Lightning, if I want Satoshi on Lightning in my wallet, I can essentially convert base chain Bitcoin to Lightning. Some wallets abstract that away for me. Moon does that. But I don't understand exactly what I'm doing here. Like I know, for example, if I'm going to use things on Liquid, I peg into it Liquid. My wallet has LBTC, and I can use that within that environment. I don't understand what's happening here. Am I in this layer 2? Am I getting another token representation of Bitcoin?
Yeah. So I think a good comparison is like you recently had Samson now on,
yep.
and he talked about Liquid, and they released Aqua Wallet, which is great, right? And in that wallet, they clearly kind of show like you have Bitcoin on the layer 1, or you have what they call like layer 2 Bitcoin.
Yes,
it would be a very similar setup to that, except the trust assumptions are better. Okay. You're not actually trusting, Samson and Adam Back and those guys to peg you out. And I would argue that the applications and the tools that you can build are superior on a ZK rollup, but functionally it would look that same way, where you can download a wallet like Aqua, and you can either acquire layer 2 Bitcoin directly, just straight from the layer 2, or you could take Bitcoin from the layer 1 and you could essentially send it to a bridge, which mints it onto the layer 2. So
it's still a peg in and peg out.
It is.
I just think we should be fair. Like you've said a couple of times, like in Liquid, you're trusting Adam Back, which isn't true. Like there's 12 companies in that federation.
Well, okay, sure.
I just want to make sure we're being fair.
And I also do. I mean, how I've kind of described ZK rollups so far is almost this like perfect world ZK rollups, where if we didn't have any kind of constraints, and we were able to do soft forks, right? Because when people started researching ZK rollups initially, it was like, hey, this is a profound idea. But, we would need soft forks, and probably like 2 soft forks to make it happen. One of them being recursive covenants, and one of them being, like a ZKP verifier. So this idea of ZK rollups kind of nerd sniped a bunch of us. But we ultimately said, okay, this will probably never happen because you can't get those sort of changes into Bitcoin. Where this really kind of changed is with BitVM, which is a white paper that Robin Linus, a developer and researcher, released back in December. And that's what's kind of reignited these conversations about ZK rollups, where it's like, maybe we can get 90% of the way there to this kind of trustless peg-in process, where it's not fully trustless, as I kind of described, but it's far more trustless than something like the liquid federated process.
I still don't understand where the additional code sits within this. I understand my node carries my code for the Bitcoin protocol, but this layer 2, where does that exist?
Yeah, the code for all of that essentially exists. If you remember, I kind of described how like in a true rollup, the data and the code actually like we're posting it almost as an inscription inside of the Bitcoin L1.
Yeah.
And if people don't want to, so the code is that the actual data that kind of exists. It's executed actually in some sort of off-chain environment. It can be executed on like just one giant, essentially supercomputer.
So it's not something that needs to be decentralized itself.
Having the zero knowledge proof itself is kind of what provides the decentralization. So like in my whiteboard video, I described where, you peg in your Bitcoin from the L1 and you get it into the L2. And there is this one kind of very hyper centralized, what they call sequencer, that's processing all the transactions. So, if we try to send something from our wallet, we send it to this very hyper centralized, sequencer. And let's assume that sequencer is Craig Wright. They're very, very deceptive and they want to essentially steal all your Bitcoins. If they try to submit that back to the Bitcoin L1 and be like, I want to steal David, Pete, and Danny's coins. Remember, in order for funds to change hands on the L1, they have to provide a validity proof. They have to,
which they can't.
Which they can't. So even if it's Craig Wright or Fake Toshi, running that centralized sequencer on the layer 2, it moves from a model of of don't be evil to cannot be evil.
Yeah, it can't be evil. Okay, so again, if you're not technical, these are very complicated things. I'm trying to think of it as a user. What is it I want from the CK roller? I want somewhat layer 2 Bitcoin so I can transact quicker. Because if the rollup goes into a block, I'm still constrained by block time, right? So it's not like it can't replace Lightning.
So you can essentially emulate like a much faster block time. So even though, you're right, the data is going on to the Bitcoin L1, and that only happens every 10 minutes. You can essentially get like a soft confirmation that, within less than 500 milliseconds, like instantly, like very, very fast.
But that's a bit like, if I send or Danny sends me some Bitcoin, I can see it in my wallet straight away, but I don't have confirmation.
True.
So it's the same as, okay.
I mean, but that's really kind of the same as Lightning. You can send a bunch of transactions in Lightning until you actually close that channel and you recognize those funds on L1. You don't actually own that Bitcoin.
Yeah, but that's not exactly the same.
Why not?
Because you're penalized on Lightning if you try and cheat it.
So here's an example. In Lightning, you are locking some funds up into a multi-sig transaction. And if somebody tries to submit an invalid state, in theory, they're penalized. If the other party says, hey, you lied, Pete, me and you opened up a channel, you're submitting an invalid state, so you're going to get penalized. Or if I'm not watching, we hope that some sort of watchtower is watching. But you can definitively submit an invalid state and you can steal funds in Lightning and you can get away with it. With a ZK rollup type setup, you cannot submit any sort of invalid state. You just have to provide a validity proof. So in Lightning, you could provide an invalid state and you could steal somebody's funds. With a ZK rollup setup, you can't.
So I was recently in Madeira. And I'm thinking of a use case. I'm selling Railbed for merchandise. People are coming up and paying. They're paying on Lightning. Instant payment. They take the stuff and go away.
Yep.
Much better than doing on-chain because unless I go zero conf, it's not confirmed, right? Can I get lightning speed transactions using ZK rollups?
Yes.
I can.
Yeah.
And but that only happens because essentially it's a zero conf state.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like, if technically you're like, well, this payment is not valid until it's confirmed into a Bitcoin block, then yes, like you would potentially have this like 10-minute gap where you're kind of like, you're getting a soft confirmation. And there's ways to kind of hedge against this where like, if you get a soft confirmation from the ZK rollup, they'll essentially ensure that they'll say, look, like we'll reimburse you or cover you.
Who will?
The sequencer, which is kind of like the node that exists on the layer 2, who's facilitating all these transactions on your behalf.
Okay. What happens if the sequencer just switches off?
Right. So if the sequencer switches off, remember they can't ever steal your funds, because the only way they can update the state is with a mathematical ZK proof. But they could just freeze and go offline. That is why you post the data onto the Bitcoin layer 1, because at any time you can, using your Bitcoin node, you can see all of the data from the rollup, and you can create a zero knowledge proof, and you can unilaterally submit that to the Bitcoin layer 1. And you'd say, look, this sequencer went offline, or they're deceptive, or they're fake Toshi, or whatever. Here's a zero knowledge proof that proves the validity of my statement and allows you to either withdraw your funds or to process something on the layer 2.
Okay. And if I get this layer 2 Bitcoin that I pegged into, and I want the speed of Lightning, but each time it's posting the zero knowledge proof to the base chain, I'm really paying high fees. I'm not getting the low fee benefit like I get with Lightning, right?
Well, there's two things to consider there. One, there is a data compression effect that happens. So you are posting the data to the layer 1, but it's not as as heavy or as impactful as if you were doing the L1 transactions. So you can get like a 20 to 40 times, I would say, scalability improvement by going on the layer 2 than you can on the layer 1.
How does that happen though? Is the sequencer batching lots together and posting it all into one?
So it's posting something called state diffs. So if you and I send 100 transactions back and forth, if you did that all in L1, all that data for all the 100 transactions, you would have to post every single one of those transactions. What the layer 2 does is it says we're only going to post what's called the state difference, meaning like the net difference between all of those 100 transactions. If it's just one Bitcoin to me, that's all that's going to essentially be posted to the layer 1.
But what if we're not posting back to each other? I'm posting somebody else, somebody's posting. Like, is it batching everyone together?
Yes.
So it's coming back and going, here's the full state of this new kind of pegged Bitcoin.
Well, would it be so?
Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I know. But so say like Pete sent 0.1 Bitcoin to you, you send 2 to me. It would just show as Pete being 0.1 less and me receiving those funds.
So on the layer 2, after we do some sort of, there's going to be like a state. Essentially, like this is everybody's balances. This is the state, a snapshot in time. The L2 rollup, every single block, it's going to post the minimal amount of data possible in order for somebody to look at a Bitcoin L1 node, to have no idea that L2 even exists, to look at a Bitcoin L1 node and be like, I can recreate the state of the L2, that snapshot that we took of the layer 2. What is the bare minimum amount of data that we need to see on the layer 1 in order to recreate that? And sometimes there could be a lot of compression that can happen there because you and I are sending a bunch of transactions. Sometimes it's not as much because, like you said, it's like you have to actually show every single transaction. So,
but is it posting all the state changes that have happened since the previous time into the blockchain?
It's only
for everybody who's using this layer 2,
right?
Or does it just update balances?
It like there could be balance changes, there could be changes in like smart contracts that were issued on there, like anything that's essentially different. So if you have like block number 10 and then you have block number 11, anything that's changed from block number 10 to 11, you need to post in there. It's not going to post all of the prior data that's already posted for blocks 1 through 10 in there.
And who's paying the fees for this state change post to the blockchain?
So people are paying fees on the layer 2. So you have this sequencer, which again is this like almost node that this single, it could be a very centralized node that runs on the layer 2, and people are transacting through that node, and it is receiving fees for that. And so what it is then doing is that sequencer is creating the zero knowledge proof, and it's creating these state diffs, these kind of compressed forms of the data, and it's posting the zero knowledge proof and the state diffs, this data, into the Bitcoin L1. And the fees that it's willing to pay to the Bitcoin L1 are from the fees that people were willing to pay onto the L2.
Okay. And is there a chronological issue there in that it has to take the L2 fees first before it knows what L1 fees it's going to pay?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe something I need to think about.
What if this gets super popular, this L2, and it's being used a lot? These state changes could be a lot of data that comes back. Yes, it's compressed, but it could be posting a lot of data into the L1.
Mm-hmm.
Could it end up taking up a whole block if it's super popular?
I think it's going to result in a fee-pocalypse.
Okay, explain that.
So I think that over the past year, we've seen fees kind of really spike because of things like inscriptions, right? Because of SegWit and then the addition of Taproot, it enabled us to kind of post this arbitrary data in the Bitcoin L1, which people are using for the monkey JPEGs and stuff, and a lot of BRCs and things that people don't like. Functionally, that's how ZK rollups would work as well. Is you're posting this data into that part of the inscriptions, but when the fees spiked with like the ordinals craze, they eventually go down because the ordinal people and they just run out of money. But now you're going to start to see a lot of new companies, some of them are legit, some of them are not legit, that are going to kind of be under the guise of creating some new layer two to Bitcoin. And some of them will have raised, in my opinion, a lot of money, and they're willing to essentially just burn money to try to validate their idea. So they're willing to just pay the Bitcoin L1 fees in order to post data and zero knowledge proofs and whatever. And that is going to consume a ton of block space, and that's going to keep fees elevated. And if a Bitcoin L2 rollup, which I think there are several being built that are legitimate, actually starts to gain product market fit, which I think there will be, then people will be paying fees on that L2. And that will allow them to sustainably keep buying the block space into the future.
How many times every 10 minutes could the ZK rollup L2 be posting to the base chain? Is it like once every 10 minutes, or is it lots of little postings? Like, how does that work? How does it know how many times to post to it?
Well, it's kind of it's up in the air, because it's like, in theory, in a perfect world, you're posting it every single block because you want to get finality, like you kind of talked about, as soon as possible. You don't want this thing where, okay, I made a transaction, but this thing will get confirmed, in 24 hours from now. So in theory, it would be posting every single 10 minutes. But I could see situations where these rollups kind of build these things where on the L2, they give somebody assurance that, hey, don't worry, even though we're not posting it every 10 minutes, like, we are giving you some sort of economic guarantee or insurance policy that it will get posted. And then maybe they'll do it every 10 blocks or something like that.
How do they enforce the guarantee?
The design space for that varies a bit, but you could have some sort of like staking model where, people essentially stake Bitcoin on the layer 2, and they say, we will ensure you that this will get into the Bitcoin block, and if it doesn't, then you can slash our Bitcoin funds and receive the money.
How does that happen trustlessly? So I'm sorry to grill you, but I think we need to really hammer into these issues.
Yeah.
Can that happen trustlessly?
I'm under the impression, yes. But some of this stuff that we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of a lot of this stuff is still under development.
Yeah.
And that's just the truth.
So and who's developing this at the moment? What kind of ZK rollup projects are there that you think, okay, this is interesting?
Do you want me to say names? I don't want to play favorites or anything.
No, yeah, it's fine.
Well,
who should we be talking to?
Yeah. Well, I think one that's kind of getting a lot of buzz right now is Citria. A guy named Orkin is the CEO and founder of that. There's another one called Bob, built on Bitcoin with Alexi, but they're kind of making some interesting design choices that maybe integrate Ethereum more than I think you guys would be happy with. Ugh. There's also a team that is technically still in stealth. I don't know if they would be happy with me mentioning their name. Maybe we can blurt it out if they're not, but it's called Alpin Labs.
Okay.
And I think their team is pretty stacked, honestly. And I think it's pretty impressive to see what they're building. There are some other kind of companies that are operating in the shadows a little bit, but fundamentally, what everybody's waiting on is BitVM. I mentioned earlier, where
so I saw a paper and I saw Adam Farrington talking about it, and I was like, I have fucking no idea what you're talking about here. What is BitVM for the layman?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to get too technical on it, but the claim with BitVM is that you can essentially compute anything on Bitcoin, which is like a very bold claim because everybody, for the most part, understands that it's like Bitcoin's very simple. It doesn't have an expressive scripting language, and we don't want to add any sort of like Turing complete contracts on it. And the way BitVM essentially works is, you could have somebody that posts some sort of collateral. They say, here's 100 Bitcoin that I'm committing onto the Bitcoin L1 that I will run some sort of computer program off chain. So somebody says, here's a bunch of Bitcoin, and then on my own computer or on an Amazon web server, I'm going to run any sort of software that you want, any sort of smart contract or this kind of zero knowledge proof verifier. And if I do not run it honestly, then somebody can essentially say, hey, you committed to running a program this way on the Bitcoin layer 1, but then when you actually did it off chain on your own computer, you didn't do it the way that we agreed. So I'm going to slash your funds. So it's a way for us to do this computation, this BitVM computation off chain, where it's no longer confined by Bitcoin, where if you're confined by Bitcoin, you can only do things on Bitcoin script or mini script, or you can do it in any programming language or anything like you want on that. But then it allows us to arbitrate it on the Bitcoin L1, where we can say, I'm calling bullshit, and Bitcoin layer 1 nodes are going to slash you for that.
How do you call bullshit though?
So this is where it probably gets a little technical, and
all right.
And so there's two things in the BitVM paper that it references. One is called an optimistic rollup, which is an Ethereum convention, and the other is essentially Taproot. And so the way this would work is all programming languages are kind of hierarchical, meaning they're kind of built on each other. Where if you have something like Python, that was actually built on C++. And then, that's an extension of C. And then that was built on something called assembly until you get down to the very granular, like almost like zeros and ones. Bitcoin cannot understand something like in Python language, Python scripting language. But you could take a program that you've written in something like Python and you can break it down into its raw components, almost down to the zeros and ones, what are called like the binary gates, like literally on a computer chip. If you send the electrical signal in, like, the gateway lights up, if the electrical signal is not going, the gateway doesn't light up like that. Those are the fundamental building blocks of any sort of programming language. And what Robin Linus figured out what you could do is you can't, upload some sort of Python program into Bitcoin script and have it execute. But you can essentially commit this kind of raw little like zeros and ones, these binary gates, into what's called like a taproot tree, this like huge giant tree that has all of these different things. And Bitcoin has no idea. They have no idea what this code means or what it represents, and they're not going to execute it. But those zeros and ones that we've committed into a taproot tree in Bitcoin are equivalent to what they're running off chain as the actual true program. And so somebody can say, hey, this program that you ran off chain, it's not what you actually committed to on chain. And they can submit to Bitcoin what's called a fraud proof, where they can say, I am proving that you did not follow this code that you committed to in a taproot tree exactly as you said. And because of that, the Bitcoin, our Bitcoin nodes are essentially able to say, well, now we're going to slash your Bitcoin and, penalize you.
Can that go wrong in any way?
Oh, God.
Because, for example, the code that's submitted into the Taproot tree, what if that already doesn't work as it's meant to? Or
Yes.
you think it's going to?
Yes. I mean, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
In any sort of development, like any of this stuff can go wrong. But I think what's getting people excited is that there's a path for it to go right.
Yes. Okay. What is you've obviously gone down this rabbit hole far more than I have, and I naturally don't understand these things. I'm not a technical person, but what is the criticisms that you've heard, valid criticisms of both BitVM and ZK rollups? With
BitVM, it's very clunky. It requires a lot of interactivity. So, and then also, I should say it has what's called a one of n trust assumption. So if you have something like a federation, you have, whatever, 15 people in the federation, and you need whatever, like 8 people to sign off. You need the majority of the people in the federation. With BitVM, the security assumptions aren't where you need the majority of the people in the kind of multi-sig to be honest, but you just need one party to be honest. Because again, what's happening is you have this one party, who we'll call the prover, that is committing, say, 100 Bitcoin to run this computation off chain. And then you could have a bunch of people, like 100 other people, that are considered verifiers. And these verifiers are verifying that the BitVM program was run properly. And so it's not fully trustless, but you're relying on one of those 100 people, not the majority of them, but just one of them, to call bullshit and say, hey, here's fraud. It's almost kind of like a watchtower in Lightning Network. But yeah, so that's kind of the main criticism of BitVM. With something like ZK rollups, the criticisms are one, that you can't have a true ZK rollup, like I talked about, without soft forks technically, without recursive covenants and having a ZKP verifier. BitVM, with that one of n trust assumption, allows us to potentially bypass those. So you could create a BitVM style, ZK rollup. Even if you come to accept that point that, hey, we can create a ZK rollup using BitVM, then you run into the issues of data availability. And people will say, hey, you only get 20 to 40 times scalability improvements on this. So those are the primary criticisms. The answer to the data availability problem is what I kind of mentioned before, where it's like, well, we can provide all these options where people can post the data anywhere. So it's, in theory, infinitely scalable, but just with different levels of security assumptions.
And amongst your more kind of well-known Bitcoiners who've been around for a while, more kind of maxi types, I don't feel like I've seen many talking about this.
I think that's changing.
You think that's changing?
I do. I think after I posted, I think talking with some of the companies that are building behind the scenes, they're starting to get a lot of attention, and people are very interested in this. And even once I posted like my whiteboard video, where I kind of explained this, which, not to show myself, but like, go to my profile and kind of like watch this video. I had people like Lynn and Preston that, followed me after, and that.
No, but I'm thinking more
Shinobi.
Your Shinobis, your Giacomos, your maybe core devs.
Yeah.
What are the kind of thoughts within those communities? Because they're the people who are perhaps been around a bit longer, a bit cynical, maybe have built stuff.
And more technical.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think a lot of the core devs are actually very excited about because like the concept of like zero knowledge proofs for scalability, these proofs of like, that's a very like sexy thing in cryptography right now. And I think it's nerd sniped a lot of them. So you'll see people like Andrew Polstra and stuff like wearing Starkware shirts at conferences. Like I'm not going to, say he's a fan of this or not, but like, I think that he appreciates the kind of math and the cryptography behind it. For somebody like Shinobi, I give him a hard time on Twitter all the time, and he knows that I'm kind of like, the Bitcoin ZK rollup fanboy. And his biggest criticism would again be that data availability. And when I tell him something like, well, we can offer all these different data availability solutions where you can post it, Shinobi, on Bitcoin L1 if you want, somebody else can post it on Ethereum, all these can cross compose, he just kind of like shoos it off and doesn't see it as a viable solution. And I think, I don't think that he's a valid criticism, more so that he just doesn't think that it's good enough. I also think that...
Is that a valid point in some ways?
I mean, it's like
20 to 40%, 20 to 40 times efficiency gain still means we're going to run into, at some point,
But
blockage.
That's the point. I mean, let's assume that we've already hit that. Like all of the gains are essentially gone. Like, why can't you continue getting infinite scalability, but you're just not posting your data on the Bitcoin L1? And it's not like I'm telling you, oh, Pete, like in order to get scalability, you have to post it on Ethereum. You have to post it on this chain you hate. It's like, dude, just post it on your own computer, like store the data yourself. Maybe we could build, like a federated sidechain, and it could be the liquid data availability layer. There's projects like Botanics, the spider chains thing where you could stake your Bitcoin and you create a new chain where you store data, and the fees that are paid to the data to post on that data availability layer actually provide yield as a Bitcoin product. Like this data availability issue that people like Shinobi and everybody else complain about, it's like such not as big of a deal, I think, as people think. And the key aspect is that even if I mentioned this, like Pete, like you post your data on the Bitcoin layer 1 and Danny posted on Ethereum and I posted on my computer or whatever, all of us can still interact and we can cross compose with each other. So whoever has different varying security concerns, all good, do whatever you want, but we can all interact with each other. It's not like these silos where you have the liquid side chain can't interact with the rootstock side chain, or you have all these different Fedi mints and you have to use like Lightning as this interoperability layer. Like all of these things can trustlessly and seamlessly compose to each other. That's the freaking dream.
But if we're keeping the data on offline, if I'm storing the data myself, we don't have a current state on L1.
You wouldn't have, so there's something, the technical term for this is like you have a rollup, which means that you are technically posting your data directly on the L1. This kind of model where you're posting data off chain is called like a volition. And so maybe you're missing like your specific transactions because you posted your data off chain, but the rest of us that posted our data in somewhere that we can access, we can still create the zero knowledge proof for our section of that state that is valid. So maybe you can't, but the rest of us can.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't really have a solid thought. I'm very interested, but I would really want to hear like Shinobi's pushback on this, or someone like Shinobi.
Yeah, and I don't fully understand the use case, what I'm actually doing.
Why?
As a user of Bitcoin, like my Bitcoin needs are very simple. I need to send people Bitcoin, receive Bitcoin, store it in a multi-sig, and then times I need to send and receive Bitcoin quickly.
Well, I would challenge you on that. I think that there's way more use cases that you're interested in.
But at the moment, for me, it's I'm saving, I'm sending, or I'm receiving, and sometimes I'm doing it on chain, sometimes doing it fast via Lightning, and that's pretty much like the needs I have, which I'm very happy with. I don't know what I'm using here. Are you proposing an alternative to Lightning? If it is, me as a user, will I see no difference? Will it operate almost exactly the same?
Well, I think it's going to operate way better because Lightning like constantly breaks, and any of these success of Lightning is just because it's covered up by custodial solutions.
Yeah, but I'm okay with the custodial solutions. Like I'm pretty cool with that because I never keep much on there anyway. So, and that's not something that has overly worried me. Of course, if there's a non-custodial solution, that'd be amazing. But Lightning's working fine for what I need right now.
So I think that, and I'm maybe I'm totally wrong, but I think that if and when this stuff gets developed, which it is, your view on this is going to change, and you're gonna be like, wow, I thought that I just wanted to save Bitcoin, have a multi-sig, and be able to send and receive it, and you're instead going to see. One, like you've constantly been asking people, it's like about scaling self-custody. So these ZK rollups can scale self-custody.
So that problem whereby if you don't control a UTXO, can you be self-sovereign with Bitcoin?
Right.
That's solvable here.
Well, if you look at it just from a binary sense, and I think some of your other guys have answered this, totally sufficiently. Like, no, not everybody can be self-sovereign because literally every UTXO that exists on L1 consumes a certain amount of data to create. There's only so much data per block, so many blocks per day. So it's literally just a physical limitation. But if you acknowledge that self-custody is a spectrum where the most secure is a Bitcoin L1 UTXO and the least secure is maybe, like Coinbase or something like that. And you have federation somewhere in the middle. With this solution of ZK rollups, even with them kind of being, not the perfectly trustless thing with BitVM, you can provide way more self-custody solutions that are somewhere in between a federation and an L1 UTXO. And I would argue much, much closer to that of a layer 1 UTXO.
So I dialed in a ringer and asked Shinobi. So he did.
You're out of order.
I love it. So yeah, guaranteed.
He did bring up the data availability thing, but he also said MEV is another issue if the sequence is not centralized.
So MEV is, maximal extractable value, right? And so, in blockchains that, say every 10 minutes in Bitcoin, there's a block. So you're batching all of the transactions together. And then the miners are technically ordering those transactions. In Bitcoin world, MEV isn't really a thing. It's maybe potentially forming, but in Ethereum world, it's huge because within their block times, there could be someone doing some sort of like big trade where they're buying, $100 million of Ethereum. They could be, borrowing against their collateral. You have all these different financial activities. And if you order those in a certain way, you can extract major amounts of essentially value. You can front run people. You can like sandwich them. So you can essentially order this, and very sophisticated actors can write these algorithms and essentially extract that value. And the logic that essentially Shinobi is getting at is that if we introduce MEV into Bitcoin, then there will be some miners who become experts at being able to extract this value. And so they become way, way, way more profitable. And so like if we're just running a mining operation right here, like, we're just a bunch of dudes like filming a podcast, like we don't know how to extract this value. And so hash rate is going to keep going up because people are making more money to be able to buy more miners, but we're essentially going to get priced out. And so you have more of a miner centralization that's happening there. I think that properly articulates Shinobi's argument. What I would say is MEV is a valid concern that we need to be aware of. However, this MEV that's happening on the ZK rollup would accrue not to the miners on the layer 1, but it would accrue to the sequencer who are kind of like the miners or the validators, like on that layer 2. And
isn't that still bad?
Not really, because what we care about is the censorship resistance properties of the layer 1. And if it starts bleeding down into the L1 miners, I think it's potentially a valid concern. But what we've kind of seen in the Ethereum world is that a lot of this MEV that's created on the layer 2 has been isolated to there. And until I see more legitimate research, aside from just speculation, I don't think it's a definitive, death blow to rollups by any means.
My assumption is we can't stop this coming anyway if someone wants to build this.
Totally. And again, it goes back to BitVM, and that's why everybody's getting excited about this. It's like, we no longer need to advocate for some sort of soft fork. We're just going to build it anyways.
And what's the kind of timescale on this?
Man.
Is it like a multi-year project?
I mean, over time, if you want like all the full set of features, absolutely. Again, everybody's waiting on BitVM. Nothing can really happen until BitVM's complete. I'm going to guess maybe within a year. Sorry, Robin and SuperTestNet and all those guys. Like, I'm just like the non-dev that can like throw random timelines out there. And then I know there are teams that are kind of like, that already have kind of like testnet versions of ZK rollups in place. So I think that you'll start being able to transact on these things on a ZK rollup within a year.
Wow. Okay. I'm not sure where to go with this next.
Well, I dialed in another ringer on that question.
Yeah, who do you ask?
I spoke to Rob Hamilton.
What did he say?
He says, are these rollups just multisigs masquerading as trustless scaling solutions that allow for unilateral exit? He said it's fine if they're just multisig, but then they aren't L2s any more than an exchange is an L2.
Right. So what he's essentially saying there is...
That's my last ringer, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's potentially a valid concern. Like, there is a path. I think initially some of these would start off as kind of like, multi-sigs in a sense, but there is a path for it to potentially get there. And I think that's why people want things like covenants and recursive covenants, because what Rob is essentially saying is that, people would, opt into a rollup. So they send their funds to a single address on the layer 1 rollup, but that's controlled by essentially a multi-sig. And then you're like, yeah, you own, rollup coins and we have zero knowledge proofs. But at the end of the day, it's still like the multi-sig that is processing the transactions. If you had something like, recursive covenants, then you could remove the multi-sig and you could say that, you can only send funds from this address, this pooled address, if it receives like a valid zero knowledge proof. So to answer your question, like there might be some that start off as multi-sigs. Maybe that's a deal breaker for some people, but there is like a clear path to get over that if we have the true way using recursive covenants or with this kind of BitVM type setup.
So you perhaps would need a soft fork.
You perhaps would need a soft fork only if you want that fully trustless version. So what I'm saying is, like, with BitVM, we can get, 90% of the way there and get that one of n trust assumption. It's kind of like I don't want to say this. If it's on this kind of spectrum where you have a layer 2 setup like Liquid, where you have a multi-sig and you need the majority of people, you need a majority of actors that are controlling that multi-sig to approve those transactions. The next step would be over like a BitVM one, where it's like you have a group of people that are controlling that multi-sig, but you only need one of them to be honest. That's what we can build today. And that's pretty damn good. Like, that's not perfectly trustless, but like only need one honest person out of like a group of 100 or thousands or more. And then if years from now, people are like, these ZK rollups were great. We love the freaking features on here. Like the wallet UX is amazing. We have Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. We have Bitcoin-backed borrowing. We have fully end-to-end encrypted transactions. They're like, let's just soft fork in like the stuff to make it fully trustless. I think people are going to start opening up to like, what are more legitimate uses? Like, I really will challenge you that simply like holding Bitcoin and being able to transact it, there's a whole other world of things that you're going to want to do. Like, you're going to want that better wallet UX. Like, you're the king of being like, you know, make it easy, make the best wallet UX.
Absolutely.
And this thing called account abstraction, which is essentially programmability of a wallet using a smart contract. That is like the hyper gold standard of what people want for wallet UX. And then Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, I'm going to bang the freaking table and say that these are so freaking important.
Hey, listen, I think they're great. If they can be achieved how you said, then brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, they already can be achieved, you know, but these things exist on like side chains, and, you know, side chains like Liquid and RSK, they're ghost towns. Nobody freaking cares about them.
That's no, I'm not going to say RSK I don't care about. I'm interested by Liquid.
Well, yeah, I mean, Liquid are like, you know, really great actors in the community, and they've proven like a commitment to Bitcoin,
and there is a growing interest. Yeah, Aqua is starting to use it.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, when you do
wallet.
look at the usage, it's not being used.
Yeah, it's not being used because, you know, what was the use case? But with the scaling issues we're having, people are starting to look at Liquid and go, okay, what's the trade-off here? I have to trust a federation. Okay, well, maybe I will trust a federation.
The problem is it's not just like the trust. Like let's assume that like we just move the federation, like that the federation will never steal. You're like, these guys are freaking Bitcoin whales. They're well established. Like, they don't want to hurt the ecosystem. There's a perception that's preventing people from bringing liquidity into Liquid, and more important, developers. You know, even though you have a sidechain where people can build all these other use cases, nobody's going to go on there. Like, partners that integrate that you need to build all these smart contract applications, they're like, dude, I don't want to go on a federation because there's this perception, there's this stigma to it.
Yeah.
And if you don't have integration partners, then you don't have developers. And if you don't have developers, then you don't have any apps that people actually want to use. Like, you need a narrative that kind of provides like a path towards a more credible, you know, decentralized peg. And if you have that, you can really attract a whole new mind share. And that's what's happening. Even though a lot of the Liquid team be like, look, why don't you build this on a side chain? The Liquid sidechain, it just doesn't provide as much flexibility as these potentially ZK rollups. And we're already starting to see developers that are like, like maybe we can build the apps on Ethereum, but maybe it's all about the money. Maybe money is the true like application, and that is the use case. And maybe we want to bring back a lot of these applications to Bitcoin. And none of that would have really happened. I mean, Liquid had their chance, and great. I support them. Amazing. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. But from what I'm seeing, there's just way more interest in some of this newer stuff.
All right, man. Well, we just have to wait and see. If it is so out of my depth. Like,
Yeah.
You know that. You know my show. It is out of my depth. I think I've tried to ask some good questions. Let's wait and see. Let's stay in touch. Let's talk about it some more. I mean, I'll be more interested when this comes, but I want to see it as using it.
Yeah.
I want to click buttons and go, oh, okay, great. Yeah, that works.
I hear you.
Yeah. And then everything else, I have to have people like you and Adam back and whoever I trust to ask questions to explain whether I should trust this.
Yeah. I mean, guilty until proven innocent. I get it.
Wicked. Well, look, we appreciate you coming in. We appreciate you doing this. Where do you want to send people?
David _Seroy is me on Twitter. Again,
Is that where the videos are?
That's where the video is. One of them's pinned. It kind of discusses the ZK rollups. Don't hold anything against me that you see me post on Twitter. It's a wild west out there. But yeah.
Mate, I know what it's like out there. Look, okay, appreciate you coming on. Thank you, David. See you later, everyone.